So my name is Chavesha Cheney. I am the Policy and Program Development at Urban Kind Institute, and we will be kicking it off now for the first session of the day, which is Advancing Environmental Justice Through Lead Poisoning. We have some panelists who will be joining us. To start it off, we have Dr. Jamil Bey, who is the CEO and president of Urban Kind Institute. And then he is the founder of the CEO of Urban Kind Institute and stirs critical thinking by facilitating through tough conversations around race, equity, and systematic change. In addition to Dr. Bey's role at Urban Kind's visionary, he serves on many boards, councils throughout Pittsburgh to drive real systematic change in policy and program that affects underserving population. Additionally, Dr. Bey is the founder of Environmental Collectives. Another panelist that we have today is Natisha Washington, who's an environmental justice organizer at 1PA. She is currently where she hopes to assist more communities with the environmental injustices and needs. She partnered with many local or environmental organizations to facilitate and implement projects like green infrastructure building, reducing air pollution through tree planting, reducing lead contamination through soil testing, and hosting multitude of community-focused and volunteer events. And also we have Masood Sales, who serves as the farm program manager at Hilltop Urban Farm. In his role, he introduces community members to agriculture in the urban context, guides new farmers in land stewardship, educates local youth and influence of ecological factors on farm yield, and discusses with all who will listen the importance of reversing the trend of environmental racism. He also serves on the board of directors of the Pittsburgh Food and Policy Council, where he represents the interests of communities experiencing food apartheid. And then we have Latricia, who you all heard this morning, who is the founder and president and CEO of Black Millennials for Flint. So before we dive in to the discussion, I just want to make sure that all of our panelists are here today, in which they are. I see them on the side. So just before, the reason why I want to start off with why the reason environmental justice is an issue, and that is because the exposure to lead can cause serious harm to a child's health. Even small amount of lead can result in damage to the brain and nervous system, slow growth and development, and learning and behavior problems. Lead exposure is not equal for all children. Low income and minority children continue to bear a disproportionate burden and exposure, primarily through contact with deteriorating lead-based paint from older housing, through drinking contaminated water, resulting from failing lead pipes, as evidenced by the recent events in Flint, Michigan, as Ms. Latricia Adams had discussed, and through demolition, which is one of the first and common reasons here in Allegheny County. These facts suggest that childhood lead poisoning is an environmental justice issue worthy of public health consideration and action. Environmental justice is focused on identifying and addressing disproportionately high and adverse effects in environmental hazards on low-income communities. So just before we kick it off with some questions that we have for the panelists, I'm gonna ask the panelists why lead is an environmental justice issue, and you could just give like a 1-minute spiel on why you think lead is environmental justice issue. So I'm gonna start off with Dr. Jamil Bey.
So the way that you defined and described environmental justice, so we have disproportionate impacts on our communities. And that's across the country. So we look here in Pittsburgh and I see some of the questions that you have prompted for us to, dig in a little deeper, that when you see a known hazard, a known threat, a poison like lead, and you've not done anything about it, because it also primarily affects Black and brown folks, to a far greater extent. There's no justice there. And so that's an environmental injustice.
Mm-hmm. Masood, what would you say?
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback off of Jamil's point there. It's definitely an environmental injustice, and getting more into a bit of the why. I would put forth that perhaps it is profitable to maintain an imbalance when it comes to people's demography and their disparate impacts when it comes to lead poisoning, in that when you have that imbalance in the community, i.e. Black and brown folks situated somewhere towards the bottom intentionally due to their poisoning and lower both health outcomes and achievement outcomes as a result of that poisoning, you set up a system whereby those people can be perpetually kind of held down, shackled at the bottom, and have their wealth extracted from the community via health interventions, prison slavery, that sort of thing. That's what
Thank you. Natisha, what would you say why environmental led justice is important to you?
It's important to me because this lead hazard that we have doesn't just impact the water that we're drinking, but it's also in the paint in a lot of our old homes around here, and it's also in the soil. So it's a hazard that's affecting us from multiple areas, especially children. So to eradicate lead would be eradicating a hazard in multiple areas, not just one where we do have a lot of environmental justice issues that are either mainly in air or mainly in water, where this one can be found in multiple locations. And I do want to apologize for not being on camera. I'm on my way to Action in Harrisburg, so Wi-Fi is a little spotty, but that's my answer.
No, you're totally fine. I know Masood mentioned the profit of it, so I think that's a good start for us to start. So for Dr. Jamil Bey, lead poisoning is an issue of the past and present. Its ability to harm communities is enmeshed in a web of destructive policies introduced over time. How might you draw the connection between policies such as redlining or incentives for big developers and lead poisoning?
So there's a bigger issue, connecting it back to profits. And so redlining and, what's happened and how that disinvestment in communities, has led to concentrations of people who are not able to invest in their own community, neighborhoods, and the declining property values as a result of that. I mean, that insidious process and all that happened, that's one piece of it. But, backing up, one of the challenges that we have, one of the reasons that the United States was able to become such a dominant economic power is because they've adopted, the practice of the United States is profits first. Corporations are privileged over people. And when you have a substance that is known to do harm and that is known to create harm in the United States, the burden of proof is on you to trace back that, this is the actual incident where I was lead poisoned. So then I can sue that person or that company. When you have so many other factors that are contributing to it. And so in other parts of the world, they use what they call a precautionary principle. When you introduce a new product, make sure that it does not cause harm. We don't do that here. And so when you see it in a good example in lead, other heavy metals, a good example, trisodium phosphate, right? This is a cleaning product that there's a skull and a crossbone on the box. You buy it, it's a heavy industrial cleaning product. It's also prevalent in Cheerios, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, frozen pizzas. And so, the idea is that here's a product that's known to be poison. This is a toxic product that you're allowing manufacturers to include in breakfast cereals because it makes it easier for them to shelve their shelf life and then for them to market that. when it's known to cause, and so, when you look at the ridiculousness of the logic that the FDA, the CDC's banned it from some products, but the Food and Drug Administration allows it with the idea that, under 70 milligrams per day, you're cool. Well, if I have a bowl of Cheerios for breakfast, and then I eat a frozen pizza, a slice of pizza for lunch, and then later for dinner, I eat something else, I've exceeded my 70 milligrams. But I can't go back and sue Cheerios because, it wasn't Cheerios didn't poison me by myself. And so now let's take this back to lead. Like you said, but this lead is thousands of years, this is known to be a problem. And still in the United States, it was the idea of profits over people. Once we started to, see connecting it back to the redlining, once that it became, that there was advocacy to ban lead, and folks were moving out of those communities that had a lot of lead, and you see a lot of folks moved out of this, a lot of white folks moved out of the cities, and a lot of black folks were concentrated. It became less of an issue to spend federal money to eradicate, because black and brown folks were the primary responses, were the primary victims now. So folks who had moved to the suburbs, who had newer water lines and new paint, didn't have those problems. And black folks didn't have very many lobbyists, in Harrisburg or in DC to fight for their issues. And so, this is where it comes back. It's full circle, but it's the way that we think that our economy is privileged over people. And I can go on forever, but let me make some space for some other folks.
Thank you, Dr. Jamel Bey. I think this is a perfect, you mentioned in the paint and how it's have been around for centuries. This question is for Masood. The dangers of lead have been known for centuries, yet it is only banned in items such as residential paint, gasoline, just before the turn of the 21st century. To this day, lead is still not banned entirely from new service lines for drinking water, commercial paint like the yellow paint on the Pittsburgh iconic bridges, or jet fuel. Why do you think our economy and regulations are so far behind, and why have industries continued to choose profit over people's health?
The shortest answer possible here is capitalism. In such a system, of course, as Jamil said, the money is favored far over individual persons or even collectively groups of people. And to further jump off of Jamil's point, we down here in the communities do not have the deep pockets necessary to have lobbyists daily in the seats of power next to the decision makers whispering in their ears. As such, our voices are very rarely heard in those spaces. And it takes the collection of all our voices down here in the streets, raising a rabble, in order to even get noticed, let alone have our concerns heard and met. I feel also that I would be kind of remiss if I did not mention also that while the United States did ban lead-based paints in residential circumstances in 1978, that was well behind the international trend. Many other countries recognize this closer to the turn of the 20th century and instituted bans of our own, and we were actually much later into that game, further evidencing the fact that corporations, companies are favored well beyond individual concerns.
Thank you for that, Latricia. We heard a lot from you this morning. And as you mentioned, lead poisoning is an injustice, not just in Flint, but in many cities across the nation. Do you notice any parallels in the local perspectives you just heard and experience in many communities in which your organization works?
Yeah, so I just want to give all the clap snaps to everyone on the panel, but to Dr. Bay when he lifted up the issue surrounding redlining. So I want to use an example in my hometown in Memphis. So Memphis actually is known for having some of the best water in the world because of its position to sand aquifers. But here's the issue. So when you begin to look at the existence of lead service lines in the city of Memphis, you can already guess where they're located, what the people look like. Right. So one area in particular is called Orange Mound. Orange Mound is one of the first Black communities established post-emancipation. Y'all, there's lead service lines everywhere in that community. If you take it a step further to look at other historically Black communities and current Black communities in the city of Memphis, you see a high concentration of elevated lead levels in drinking water. You also see the existence of partial lead service replacement. If we know that these things exist, right? But capitalism, that profit, we have money to rid these issues. There's money coming into communities where we could have had these lead service lines replaced decades ago, but it's not a priority because Black and brown communities are not a priority and essentially like dehumanized. And that is not any different than what happened in Flint, Michigan, what's happening right now in Benton Harbor, Michigan, where there are Black people, where there are Latino people, where there are indigenous people, there will always be issues that are pervasive to an environment. It's the leading correlation, right, is your zip code and the color of your skin, right? And so all of those things overlap. We see the same things in Baltimore when we, went door to door. I saw people that looked just like me, right? And where we didn't have enough manpower, on foot to go, to the thousands that are impacted by issues surrounding lead, we know that they will look like the majority of everybody that's on this panel this morning. So those are the parallels and the similarities that we see. And I think that what is the most frustrating in this space is while research is important, we already know what lead does. Like, we don't need another forum to talk about what lead does. It's time beyond time for action to be done. Not only do we not just know what lead does to the body, we know how to fix it, just remove it. We know all the ways to mitigate it. And to know that and to not do something about it, we have to call a spade a spade. So in order for us to truly get to a place where we have lead-free communities, not just in Flint, in Memphis, Baltimore, other in Chicago, East Chicago, St. Louis, all of these places where we know Black and brown people exist and live, we have got to start to do the work. And that's just not preaching to the choir here. That's putting the emphasis on the people who are in office. We got to make sure that we are engaging on every front. I know with Black Millennials for Flint, we work from an intersectional perspective. We talk about the correlation between EJ and voting, but you can't talk about voting if you don't talk about redlining and the redistricting that's happening all across the country. But I'm going to stop right here because I can keep going. But those are just some of the trends that we see that are almost identical in every city that we encounter.
Thank you. I know you in your prior discussion when we first came on, you talked about how you had created change, but it was grassroots and on the level with communities. It wasn't elected officials that had gotten that done. It was the community who had gotten that done. and you speak about action. So this question is for Natisha. How do you see the injustice of lead poisoning taking place at a grassroots level? And how are communities responding to this issue? And how can we connect this issue to the residents and the relevancy so that the residents understand and can be and take more action with themselves on that grassroots level?
Yeah, I mean, Latricia had made a lot of good points that are related to a lot of the conversations that we have in our community, because environmental justice is a health hazard and everybody is aware of how much of a health hazard it is. And when you start bringing children to the equation of these conversations and saying, well, your children's mental development is being affected by this, so their behavior in school, how they're learning is affected by it, it really pulls at the strings of a lot of people. Just this week in Pittsburgh, the 3 council members had stood with our water table, which is comprised of a lot of community leaders who are focused on lead contamination. They were standing with us saying that we're going to pass this bill of a lead ordinance where they are going to test homes for lead paint. They're going to test soil for lead. They're going to start doing lead line replacements. And a lot of the statements that they made were around how it's going to affect children, especially their children as well, because even though this is mostly found in Black and brown communities, it's found all over our city and all over our county for that matter. So this is not just affecting our children, but it's affecting everybody's children. It is affecting our children a lot more because, like I said, it's not just in our water, but it's in their homes. And a lot of our homes, if it's 100 years old and you don't have somebody that can maintain it, you have lead paint that's chipping, and a child can get lead poison very easy from those situations. So a lot of people from the grassroots level are saying, you know, we don't want our children to be affected. And we also want it to be known that these effects of the hazards from this lead are also impacting how our schools are doing. So a lot of people are showing our schools having these low test levels, and they're saying that our children have all these behavioral issues, but aren't looking at these health impacts that are happening to them on a daily basis from the lead contamination that's even in their school water. There's a lot of schools that are found that have lead in their drinking fountain water, that have lead in their paint, and not a lot is being done by it. So we are happy that now we have like a council that's saying, hey, we're going to pass this lead ordinance so that not only are these houses getting repaired and these pipes are getting repaired, but the lead ordinance will also stop them from just demolishing homes that have lead paint and have the particles flying in the air that goes into other people's homes. We have a lot of development that happens around here, and when they just demolish these buildings and you have all these dust particles in the air, that is now an air pollutant that's affecting them as well with lead contamination. So a lot of people are so focused on like, how are we going to make sure that our children stay healthy from all these environmental hazards that we're experiencing. But one thing that does come up now in conversation as we move our work outside of the city into more of the county is a lot of these smaller municipalities don't have these resources and these programs to replace these lead lines, to repaint homes that have lead. And it's really hard getting through their councils to try to put in these laws and policies that will help eradicate that, because a lot of the smaller municipalities don't really communicate with their residents. So what we try to do, and we've done this with a lot of the people who are on this call, many groups, to put a report together to educate our residents, to let them know this is how it's affecting you. This is what your lead levels look like in your community as well. And comparing that even to the city and to other areas that are around them that have more investment, that have had lead line replacements, and saying these are the actions you can take. Because one thing that we've also found in smaller municipalities is this has been normalized. This is something that people in these communities have been dealing with for so long that it just became normal. When we talk to community members, they're like, oh yeah, you know, we have to buy bottled water and our water comes out brown, and it's always been an issue, and the county has never done anything about it. So we just kind of like gave up on fighting, and we come into their communities with our, partner organizations coming into their communities as well and saying, no, y'all have people power to make this right. Y'all have people that can stand up to your council members, that can talk to the Allegheny County Health Department and make them do their job, which is to protect y'all from all of these harms that are affecting y'all. So we're happy that a lot of people are already like aware of these situations, but definitely have to go forward with educating people more and letting them know that this is not a lost cause. This is something that you can actually deal with as just the community, because y'all are the people that vote these people in. Y'all are the people that this is affecting. Y'all are the people that have a voice to make this change. So I will stop there because I don't know where our time is, but that is how conversations are going on the grassroots level.
No, thank you for sharing that. You brought up some really great points. I think everybody, not everyone, but a lot of the people who are in these spaces know that, Pittsburgh is getting money from the federal government. And so there will be lead replacement lines. But as Latricia had mentioned, we know what to do to remove this, to solve this issue. So this brings me to my next question for Dr. Jamil Bey. What would more transformative justice look like for communities impacted by lead poisoning? Is this industries paying for remediation? Is this reparations? What would you say this looks like? You're muted, by the way, Dr. Jamil.
Building off of what Natisha was just talking about. One thing that, we're talking about transformative justice. If we think about the intersections for lead and all of its impacts. Now, most immediately, one of the challenges, not only here in Allegheny County, but across, there are not enough people who are certified to do this work for lead mitigation. So there's an investment opportunity to invest in Black folks, communities that have been disinvested from. Let's create those job pipelines. These are going to be decent jobs that pay a decent wage. So let's make sure that you have opportunities to get the skills to mitigate the lead in your own communities. And so now we're stabilizing families and giving folks income. This is an education issue. Kids who are have lead poisoning, that creates all kinds of challenges to the education system. So let's get educators involved here as advocates from the door. Latricia, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Latricia was saying in her earlier presentations about the power of bringing advocates, public health and medical, but also education advocates to the table. If we're going to transform education, we need to mitigate this, and we need to be ready for this part of the conversation. So this is also, now we're talking about affordable housing and reinvestments in housing. Pittsburgh has a very old housing stock. A lot of these communities need to be rebuilt. And if we're doing that, here's the opportunity to do it right with the people in these communities having a decent place to live. And so transformative justice, we're talking about reparations. I don't expect anybody to start cutting checks. But when we're talking about investing at scale to address the disinvestment for generations across the board, so that folks have access to the opportunities and aspirations that should have for your kids.
To go into the next question, such as I know Natisha mentioned smaller municipalities not having the resources that they need or the people that they need to inform their community or make that change. This question is for Masood. How do you see the legacy of this lack of urgency to protect people from lead paint playing out in communities such as Mount Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, it's Mount Oliver. It's across Allegheny County. A lot of areas around here are experiencing the same sort of issue, and you see it playing out, as Jamil mentioned, in the age of the housing stock, lack of replacements for aging and deteriorating housing stock. When there are demolitions, of course, that space is left vacant, often bare. The demolitions are very frequently hasty and not up to best practices in terms of lead mitigation. So you get additional dispersal in that area. And furthermore, you see it also in the people of the neighborhoods. You heard a little bit about underperforming schools in these areas, and very frequently there's a bit of a scapegoating that happens in Black and brown communities, whereby some of the symptoms of lead poisoning, whether it be kind of delayed developmental delays when it comes to learning, impulse control, things like that, are often utilized to disguise the problem and not look at the root cause. That community over there is underachieving academically. That community over there is more prone to crime because of how they look and not because of the environments in which they live. And so part of opening up those opportunities for transformative and restorative justice is kind of fighting back in the form of education to diminish that scapegoating and really allow for us to identify this issue as it is in these communities.
One of the things, thank you for that. One of the things, we talked a lot during this conversation, but one of the things I haven't heard that I really would like to touch on, and this question is for Latricia, is there a connection between maternal health and lead poisoning prevention, and how does the issue show up in the fight to protect Black mothers and childbearing people?
Yes, there is absolutely a connection there. So from a technical perspective, so if we know that a child that is born, I'm gonna put quotation marks, a girl, you come here with your ovaries, you have your eggs, everything. So when you are developing over time, if you are exposed to lead does not exist in the bloodstream forever. It's only in your bloodstream temporarily. That lead is then absorbed in your bones. Right. So there are other ways that you can help to mitigate lead that may enter the body, like with a good diet that's filled with fruits and vegetables, but insert food deserts and food swamps, which is a whole nother topic that impacts Black and brown communities. So once you reach childbearing age, you get pregnant. If you were exposed to lead at any point in time, it's the concept of body burden, cumulative body burden. And so if there was lead that was deposited in your bones when you're pregnant, your bones become a little bit porous. And so the lead that was deposited in your bones is now released back out and goes into your bloodstream. And so now you're talking about lead exposure, not just to you carrying the child, but also to the fetus, the growing baby. And so when you put that into perspective with the levels of lead that childbearing people are exposed to, we could talk about, for example, like the childbearing people in Flint, where with the Flint water crisis settlement, that was one of the first groups that had to be focused on. Is you're talking about intergenerational lead exposure and lead poisoning. In addition to that, we know, and I'm excited about this personally, that more Black women are going back to breastfeeding. And so, or chest feeding. And so also there are implications if there were instances where a childbirthing person was exposed to lead. We're now talking about potential impacts on your breast milk. So there are very critical connections between lead exposure and how it impacts maternal health. I also want to emphasize another aspect that we don't talk about enough at all is the impact of lead exposure and lead poisoning for male reproductive health. And so with male reproductive health exposure to lead, again, like over a period of time, right? So there's so many different ways that you can be exposed to lead, and sometimes it comes out of your body, all of it does not. And so specifically with men, lead exposure, lead poisoning also causes fertility issues. So you could be sterile. That is not talked about enough. So even with the Flint water crisis, with the settlement, they didn't include that at all. There were men that were impacted by the Flint water crisis. And we talk about the decline of babies being born in Genesee County in Flint, Michigan. But we're only looking at it from a maternal health perspective, but not both of them together. And so, you think about with carrying a baby to term, if you're exposed to lead, that decreases the likelihood that you will have a safe pregnancy, meaning that you can have a miscarriage or have the baby preterm. So there are a myriad of unfortunate ways in which lead impacts reproductive health as well as maternal health.
Thank you. I personally never thought of the male side of things, but that was a good perspective, and it really isn't talked about enough. So I know we talked about the Flint, Michigan water crisis and the many ways that lead can get into your system. This question is for Natisha. How do privatization of water authorities impact environmental justice?
Yeah, so as I was talking about the small municipalities, a lot of them are being privatized. A lot of private companies are buying water municipalities from these small municipalities because they can't afford to manage their own municipalities most of the time. So they make these deals with these private companies that they'll take them over. The issue with having private water companies is they're not required to follow PUC regulations. They're not required to meet up to the standards that are healthy, and they're not required to have customer assistance programs. So when you have a private water company, not only do you have the challenge of trying to get the council to cooperate, but now you have the challenge to get the board of those municipalities or the company's board itself to pass regulations where they have stricter standards. And because a lot of these companies are, as the Sue was talking about, these are capitalistic businesses that are trying to make money, they're not as concerned with the human factor of that. They're like, oh, if this is going to cost us a lot of money, if we don't have enough money in the budget to do this, then we're not going to do it. And there's not a lot of people that can force them to do otherwise because they are operating over their own finances. So they're allowed to make a lot of their own rules. So what we find a lot of times is if we don't have the county on our side to be like, hey, you need to make your regulations stricter, or we don't have the EPA on our side to say, hey, you need to make your regulations more stricter, then there's not a lot that we can do as far as budging them besides trying to get the people to push back and say that, hey, we're not going to support this service. We're going to make a fuss until y'all change your regulations. But at the end of the day, we have to get their board to make the decision to say, hey, we're going to change the rules. So I know in Pittsburgh, we have Wilkinsburg Penn Joint, who is not as privatized as PA American Water, but their board, and they just have been giving us the whole runaround. We keep going back and forth with them just to get people a customer service program after the pandemic, where people are dealing with a lot of utility issues, especially when the moratoriums were taken out. So it's really a big issue when it comes to private companies, and they're growing so fast. PA American Water tried to get our PWSA water in the city to be privatized, and they continue to do so because a lot of our municipalities are struggling financially. goodness to a lot of the like American Rescue Plan money that's coming in, and a lot of these finances coming in for the city, because we would be in the same situation that a lot of municipalities are kind of forced to be in due to their financial circumstances. So we fight hard to make sure that these places do not get privatized, because then it becomes an even bigger burden on people who are already in a low income situation, who are already trying to fight with their municipalities, and now they have to fight with a private company that's definitely almost all the time putting profit over people.
We have a question from the audience that everyone can tap into, and the question is can you talk more about how communities can put on the pressure while still remaining collaborative with these public municipal agencies? And anyone can jump in to answer that.
I can speak to that. So there's a lot of different strategies around that. So I'll use a couple of realistic examples. So specifically, when you are engaging with elected officials, it's very important for them to know that they work for you. And so you're not trying to be their friend, but setting that precedence up front. Is I'm smiling with you now because I need to make sure that I'm advocating for my people, but I want you to know that at any moment in time, should you do anything to jeopardize this relationship that means that you have negatively impacted my people and my community, then, we're going to have a different conversation. And so one of the things that I think is really powerful is for community members to understand the power of their vote. Mm-hmm. Far too often, and I even have to battle with myself about this, but you feel like you don't have enough money to be influential. And that's not true. And we know these people that are, from our neighborhoods that I like to call the community, the neighborhood gatekeeper. Like, you're not going to talk to people in this community until you come through me, right? And this person doesn't have to be a millionaire, but they have social influence. And so in addition to establishing rapport and relationships with elected officials, and I put in the chat box, is kind of understanding the social dynamics of how everyone is working together. And another example that I'll give, and it is actually grounded in maternal health, I think about a state rep, young Black woman, barely 30, out of the state of Tennessee. And so we work directly with her. So, we brief elected officials around these issues with the purpose of them taking this, and making it a bill, making it a policy. So we come initially from a place of we want to collaborate. That's our initial starting point. Now, in the instance where there is resistance, then you have to shift. And so in those instances where you have to shift, that's when we call on our social influencers. We know who those people are. You know who all the people are that donate money to certain campaigns. If you can study those folks and figure out what platform they're really passionate about, if it intersects with yours, if it's about environment, you can put the pressure on through those influencers as well. So it sounds cliche, but it's literally like playing chess. And I hate that we have to do that, because you should just care about people. But unfortunately, like my brother Masood said, everybody is not about the people. Sometimes it's about money. And it's really important for us to be as strategic as possible. And the last thing that I will say, and it may step on some folks' toes, it's also important that if you are a Black or brown person and you have been awarded or honored with a platform where you have social privilege, you have economic privilege, you have intellectual capital, it's important that those individuals use their power for the greater good. So that means that if you are, and I put this in the chat also, like, I understand what my influence is. Unfortunately, if I make a comment to a commissioner or to a city council person, it's going to hit differently. It shouldn't, but it does. It's going to hit differently from the very people who are represented in their respective district or ward. If I stand in solidarity with that community person, you're gonna strike me down too? Are you gonna ignore me? You're not gonna ignore me. You shouldn't have ignored your constituent, but us understanding our power as Black and brown leaders and stewards of the community is also really important to do a good flex on folks and let them and remind them who you are and who our people are within our community. Again, I'll stop there.
And related to that, building on, the earlier part of one of the points that Patricia was making, that as an elected official, and Shabesha, you probably have heard me say this before, you are as good for me as what are you done for me today? That's your job as a public servant. Now, you as an elected official, you have a broad range of constituents that you have to satisfy. I don't give a flying filth about the rest of those folks' issues, because what always happens is that Black folks bring this compromised position where we know they got all these other things. Well, let's see if we can get this. Damn it, our children are dying. You're poisoning them. You're not supporting, you're not providing resources for their education. They don't have safe places to play. Well, maybe if we do this. Meanwhile, other constituents that have more political influence, more economic influence, are having their needs met. And we're trying, can we break off a little piece? So not for my vote. What are you doing for me right now? What's happening for the people that I care about and my issues? And that's how we have to remind them of that. Hey, I'll support you, Rep. I support you, Councilman, on this issue, but don't think that that means on all the other BS that you're trying to run down, that I got your back. Or no, I will publicly attack you on that nonsense because you're working against the people now. And so when we see where we are now in this city, when you talk about how many good things are happening, and one more reason, this month, one more acknowledgement, one of the best places in the world, in the country to live, Pittsburgh, for white folks. And in this, not the same report, but the University of Pittsburgh is going to send out a report later this semester. It says this is also one of the worst places in the country to live for Black folks. Now, as an elected official, you got to deal with that. The greatest discrepancies across race of any city in the country, right here. So don't tell me, oh, well, we're trying to, hell no.
So Dr. Jamil Bay is running soon. We know that.
No. I don't lie, steal, or cheat. I can't run for public office.
Natisha, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to add on to what Jamil said, because we had just experienced this with the American Rescue Plan, where we had all this money to, help our communities, and our council people made a budget and gave the communities that were like low income and Black and brown like 2 days of public comment to say what we wanted to do with that money. And it kind of was like a big slap in our face of like, we have these resources finally to do something for our community, and our council people aren't even involving us in this conversation. And even when we had the conversation, it was already decided where the money was going on, what was going to be done. So I 100% agree with all that Jamil is saying. And I think a lot of times what I saw, especially in the meeting after that, the other council members from, the more well-off communities were saying, oh, well, we had this plan already in place. We already had these things set up. So it was easy for us to just allocate the money. Wasn't a lot of these organizations, nonprofits, especially in Homewood in the city, it was a thing of, well, our nonprofits made plans too. We've had plans for years that we made, and y'all didn't come and help us with it. Y'all didn't approve these plans. Y'all didn't give money to these plans. And it seems like a lot of times they put the brunt on our nonprofits to do all this work. And we're trying to get the council members to know what the community wants. And it's not till the last minute that they're like, oh, okay, what's going on? And it's kind of a big issue that a lot of our nonprofits have to scrape up all of our money, scrape up all of our resources, get our own volunteers to do all this work to help the communities. And our council members don't support us until they need us to do something that is more beneficial for them. So I just want to add that part.
Thank you. Masood, would you like to add anything?
I think my fellow panelists thoroughly covered this one. I just, like to jump on the train and just say, hold your electeds to account. Keep an eye on who they're appointing. If you don't like who they've appointed, elect someone else. Talk to your neighbors, get to know them, form allies at the grassroots level with folks who are around you, and, get them all to do a call-a-thon. If there's a particular issue area or a bill that is going to be introduced or one that you want introduced, contact your representative. Annoy them until they do what you want, because that's their job.
Yes, thank you. Let me see if we have any other questions from the audience. We have, do other countries, and we have about 5 minutes left, do other countries allow that in their product, like in Europe, we are always behind? I'm not exactly sure when this comment came in to really specify what they mean when they say
It's
allow.
probably related to the trisodium phosphate. And
Okay.
the answer is no. General Mills sells Cheerios and they sell Cinnamon Toast Crunch in the UK, in the EU, without the trisodium phosphate in it. And so they can produce a product without it. It's banned in the UK, in the EU, and General Mills does not, they don't include that poison in their cereal products.
Okay. 1 second. Okay, so yeah, that's all that we have. We don't have any more questions from the audience, I believe. So is there any last minute things that the panelists would like to say to people, whether it's advice, whether it's how they can become more involved? Any last minute comments?
Well, I want to add just to what Masood was saying. Everyone, specifically Pittsburgh City Council, they've shown their hands. There's no surprises. You know who they are. You know who represents you and who does not. You know who's traded away your issues. And I think that these are the folks that we need to hold accountable and organize to get them out of office.
And I'd just like to put up a further shout to Latricia for repping the people making people. They are the folks who are going to put the next generation of foot soldiers out here to fight this fight. So, I have high hopes that we'll live in a lead-safe environment by the end of my life, but I'm not holding my breath.
Thank you.